All okay? Thank you very much, by the way. Can we give the translators a round of applause back there for thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's what we're going to do. This is going to be messy in a different way. It's going to be messy in the way that we're going to try to just have a conversation, and we'll see how this goes. I am going to, here's the extent of the form of the next 55 minutes. First, I'm going to flip through all 8 of these provocations, and I do think of each of those posters as like a poke to react to. I honestly don't know what to do with those ideas, but I am confident that we are seeing those ideas in our strongest classrooms more often than we think about them in our training of our teachers. And so I think that's a challenge to us. So I want to open up that conversation. I'm going to walk through all 8 so everyone, we start in the same place, have a little bit of a conversation. Then I'm going to share with you some of the implications that I think that has for us. That'll just be a few minutes. And then we're going to have wide open conversation. So there'll be 2 points in here when I'm going to ask people to take the mic and share. And I'll probably share some reactions, but I want us to challenge each other. So each of you got to see 5 of these. I'm just going to give headlines and maybe one of my favorite stories that illustrates each one. Very quickly, this first one, honestly, I think this might be the most important of all of them if I had to pick just one. Orientation to vision. And I'm not sure everyone got to really read that yellow box. I'm going to tell this story to illustrate this. This is a teacher named Ivy in Los Angeles, or no, the Bay Area, in San Francisco, Oakland area. Ivy's classroom, if you went into that classroom, you would see students engaging with text, critical thinking, students teaching each other. I mean, just amazing. Because Ivy said, you students are in 5th grade. That means they're 10 years old. She said, our vision, our big goal is that when you graduate from 12th grade, you will have the choice to go and succeed in university. That's what's going to happen. So I'm going to teach this classroom in a way that makes that true. One day, Ivy came into her class and she said, all right, students, take out your book and turn to page 35. Here's a worksheet. Read the book, do the worksheet. And she just stood there. And the students looked at each other a little bit, and then they did it. And then she gave them another worksheet. And she said, do the worksheet. And she just stood there. And the students did it. And that went on a little bit. And then she stopped and she said, all right, let's call timeout. Tell me about how this class felt this morning. And some of this is written here, like we have this sort of transcript of these students. They said, well, it was very strange. One student said, Miss Martinez, are you feeling okay? Another student said, you know, it's a little bit more like one of my other classes. And she said, you know, let me tell you why I taught like that this morning. Last week, because we have agreed that you are going to, by 12th grade, you are going to have the choice to go and succeed in college. I went and visited the middle school and the high school where you're going to go. And I looked at the classrooms where you're going to sit. And I saw a number of teachers teaching like I was just teaching. And I have to tell you, friends, I did not see you all doing anything to work to get the most learning out of a teacher who teaches like that. She put it right to them and said, if this is what we're doing, you have to own that. I like that story, not because I think every teacher should go do that with their students, but because that method, that technique, that strategy is not on any list that we have ever made. That strategy came because Ivy said, here is the vision that will be true. What are the obstacles between here and there, and how do I help my students navigate them? She was aligning her actions and her students' actions to that vision. It's an illustration of that. One of the problems that I think we see, this is across education, not just our programs, is when we create a rubric of teacher actions, what happens in our minds is we start to think, checklist. If I do these actions, I'm good. That's just never true. Because what teaching is, when we really realize what it means, what it takes to take students who are on a path to a few opportunities and put them on a path to many opportunities, is it takes a teacher who is innovating and thinking, what do these students need here today that aligns with that vision? That is a very difficult concept to turn into a framework, but I think this is a profound challenge to teaching as leadership. Teaching as leadership, most people think of it as a list of actions, right? That's what it looks like. But if you think I'm going to go in there and do these actions and then I'm going to get the results, that's not what's happening in these classrooms. Yes, they're helpful, but the truth is, when I go into our strongest classrooms, they have our teaching as leadership rubric, and guess what? They've scratched pieces of it out. They've scribbled on it. They've said, in my classroom, if this is what I'm trying to get to, this is what my kids need. That was a little longer than I'll take, just because I feel so strongly that this is a critical element of this, that many of our systems not only do not support in our teachers, they take it away from our teachers, right? I don't know if anyone has read the research by Daniel Pink, this book, Drive, about like what motivates the most successful people in any context. He says it really comes down to three things: purpose, mastery, and autonomy. Purpose, mastery, and autonomy. When I think about how our systems treat our teachers, we might ask for mastery. We do very little supporting, like, nurturing purpose, and we basically take autonomy away. That's not what's happening in our strongest classrooms. I think that's a challenge for all of us. Many of you looked at this poster, some didn't. Reflection. Let's see, did I miss one? Reflection. I mean, those of you that are longtime master educators, this was not a surprise, right? Teaching well requires taking time to think about what's working and not working. In many of our models and in many of the countries I see in terms of teacher training, there's an emphasis on reflection on data, but less reflection on purpose. Why are you doing what you're doing? What are the values and the vision that's driving you every day? Because honestly, like I've been in the classroom, we all have, there are constant drains on that motivation in teaching. There are constant alternate purposes. And if we're not taking the time to go to church in our work, like that's how I think about it, to reflect and stop and think, why am I doing what I'm doing? Is it still the same reason? What are my values? What are my students' values? We're not getting there, and these teachers are. And I think that's a challenge to us. Relationships. I want to point out, I don't know if anyone got to see this data point. This one keeps me up at night. We did a study. I don't know if anyone knows, there's a guy named Jim Collins who was a Stanford professor. He wrote a book called Good to Great. He has a methodology of studying differences between pairs. And we did that with teachers. We found pairs of teachers who looked the same on paper, but one of them got great results and one of them didn't. And we looked at what was different between those two pairs of teachers. It's a sort of strange methodology. It goes very, very deep on a small number of people instead of surveying a wide number of people in a shallow way. I'm going to tell this story maybe a couple times just because I want to be sure we get really clear. I think it is an enormous challenge to teaching as leadership, and to all of us. On these teachers, we had pairs of teachers, one who grew dramatically and one who didn't, and we compared everything about those two teachers. The single most predictive data point out of, and I'm not exaggerating, 1,000 data points. What of the data points in we have these teachers predicted which teacher would grow the most and which teacher didn't? Was this survey question. We asked the teachers to tell us On a scale of 1 to 7, 1 is I strongly disagree with this statement. A 7 is I strongly agree with this statement, and everywhere in between. We gave the teachers this sentence: the students in my classroom are people that I would like my own children to get to know. I'm going to say that again. The students in my classroom are people that I would like my own children at home to get to know. The answer to that question, how strongly someone agreed on that, was the most predictive data point we had for how much students learned. Now there's a lot of stories we can tell about what's true about that, what that tells us. One thing I interpret that is relationships matter. You don't get to the point of saying, these students in my class are people I want my own children to get to know, unless there is a profound, deep trust and relationship in getting to know those students as people. The question that has for us, I think, is, are we doing anything to foster that? In fact, are we actually doing things to inhibit that? I think if I'm totally honest with some of the institutes that I've designed, if one of our teachers wanted to get to know their students that well, they couldn't. We weren't giving them time. We weren't giving them space. I think it's a challenge for us. Just going to go quickly here. Mindsets matter a lot. Again, I think there's people in the room that are going to say, well, no kidding. You don't have to do a big research to tell us that. I don't think this is how we usually act. I have not been to many teacher preparation programs, and I'm talking about schools of education, I'm talking about our programs, I'm talking about whatever, where there is a strong emphasis on nurturing and growing mindsets, where there's a strong emphasis on selecting for beliefs and orientations. I'm very curious people's reaction to this. This tends to be a little bit controversial. I have to say, the more I'm in these classrooms, the more I do this work, the more I believe this is hugely important. This one about power, identity, and awareness, let me just say this. Let me say the fact. The fact is, if I right now could magically bring 12 of the most transformational teachers that we have seen around the world, and I define transformational as teachers whose students are coming into the classroom far behind and on a path to few opportunities in life, and yet students are leaving that class on a different path. They're working harder, they're learning more, they're ahead, they're on a path to broader choices in life. If I had 12 of them in the room, this is not hypothetical because this is what we do, we ask these people, we interview them, every one of them says, I have a vision that my students, even though they're poor, even though they're, this minority group in this slum in India, even though they're a girl in a Muslim context where she's going to have all kinds of challenges to her choices in life, what these teachers say is, if I am not having honest conversation with my children, in an age-appropriate way, about the injustices that they are going to face because of their identity. And if I am not having honest conversations with my children about the assets that they have because of their identity, I do not feel that I can have confidence that they can leave my classroom and navigate an unfair world to the vision that we have. This is controversial because some people say, it makes some of us uncomfortable. Some people would say, you don't talk to kids about racism. You don't talk to students about the low expectations they may meet. That's not what these teachers say. I'm assuming there was a teacher that I studied here in Bulgaria named Gergana. Does anybody know her, remember her? She's not here, right? It'd be interesting if she was in the room. I was so struck by the conversations that she was having with Roma students where instead of saying, here are the deficits that we need to fill, she was saying, what are the cultural assets that you are bringing because you are Roma that are going to help you? What are the strengths? And starting from there, and put her in the position to have very honest conversations about a challenging world with children. See it over and over, and I don't think teaching is leadership, and I don't think many of our systems go at this very well. And I understand why. When we really get into this conversation, it makes us realize that we are part of the system that's benefiting from some of the challenges that we're talking about, and that's uncomfortable. But I will say that's what these teachers are doing. Content, rigor, and mastery. Let me just point this out. We see this over and over. Our weakest teachers, when you say, why are you teaching math? They say, well, because that's my job. You get a little stronger, they say, well, I'm teaching math because my kids are going to take tests and they need to do well. Little stronger teachers saying, you know what? Math is important to them in life. It has applications. That's great. But there's another level. I'm teaching math not just because it's useful in life, but because learning math and the critical thinking of math, it actually is going to open doors for them. There are ways that that is going to broaden their opportunities. And then we get all the way up here, these two, the highest level. I am using math. I'm using the difficulty of learning content to build my students' confidence and resilience and perseverance and grit. I had one teacher, Makia Love in DC, who said to me, look, I'm assigned to teach language arts to elementary students, and I'm teaching reading and writing, and my students need to learn to read and write. But I am using the challenge of learning to read and write to build my students' values and mindsets. And what she said that really helped me understand is she said, if I was a coach out there on the track teaching people to run fast, I would be using the challenge of running to teach confidence and perseverance and resilience and grit. I would say, how fast are you running now? All right, by next week we're going to run this much faster. How are we going to get there? But I'm not a coach. I am a teacher, and I'm using literacy. It's my track. It's my swimming pool. It is my challenge that we are using to build those things, to build my students' leadership. Again, I think this is important because I don't think our models reflect that idea very fully. And I wonder, what are the implications of that? Oh, this one really worries me. It really worries me. And I won't speak for everybody out here. In my experience, let me just, I'll just talk about Teach for America, where I've spent the most time of this work. Our focus has largely been on building teachers' skills and actions. That calls for a certain theory of adult development. How do you build skills? You break them down into pieces, you practice the pieces, you put them back together, you practice them, you build skills. As we have become to say, you know what? Mindsets matter too. High expectations, in fact, may matter more than whether you're a perfect lesson planner. It may matter more than the skills, whether you have a growth mindset, whether you are constantly thinking, how can I get better? And you know what we have done at Teach for America? We have taken a theory of development that works for skills, break it down and practice it, and we have cut it and pasted it onto mindsets and said, all right, let's break down high expectations and practice them. Let's break down locus of control and practice it. Let's break down growth mindset. Let's try to practice it. By the end of this session, you're going to have higher expectations. I know some people are giggling. It's what we're doing. And I would bet that it's not just Teach for America. There's a whole world of applying a theory of development that applies to skills and actions to trying to apply that to purpose and mindsets, and it doesn't work. It frustrates all of us. And it puts us in a difficult position because what we know, what we're learning, especially from some of our programs around the world, like Teach for India, where it's really going hard at this mindsets, is these aren't things that you practice. The way you build mindsets is you get out there and you have disorienting experiences in a community, in a classroom, and you spend time reflecting on how does that experience challenge what I believed yesterday? And then you learn some things, you prepare, and you do it again. It's this sort of cycle of changing how we believe. And not many of our programs are sort of built on that learning and mindset cycle. Student leadership, this was back there. I saw some really, I got to tell you guys, as a teacher, it is just torture to not be able to understand what everyone is saying in those groups. I was going around trying to read body language. Like, I can tell there's a debate. Is it a happy debate or an angry debate? And that was as far as I could. I tell there was like some real conversation on that. We're in a minute, we're going to hear what some of it was. In our strongest classrooms, the teachers, over the course of the time, there's this incredible growth from I to we. An incredible move from directing the class to sharing ownership of the learning. Pan, can I call you out just for a minute? I had the opportunity to go to Pan's classroom yesterday. There were 2 classes, the same kids. The first hour, Pan sort of presented things and it was good. The second hour, he put the students in charge of each other's learning. They were actually grading each other and it counted. And the room just lit up. I mean, it was incredible. In fact, there was this great moment that I keep talking about, but right in front of me, there were 4 boys. How old are they? They're 15-year-old boys. They're working on presentations in English, and they were supposed to give each other their presentations, and they had practiced, and they were grading each other. And Pan came over and said, you guys were out of time. This last boy, you don't have time to do it. And you know what all the boys said? Hurry, hurry, do it. And Pan turned around to go back to the front of the classroom, and another kid got up and was like, I'm doing my presentation to you guys. Like there was a motivation in there. A lot of it had to come from like putting students in the lead of the learning. And what these teachers say to us is, my vision of my students 10 years from now is that they are leaders in their community. And if my classroom is not a microcosm of that vision that I have, what am I doing here? Like we have to give them space to practice who we want them to be. And that means they have to take ownership in the classroom. Here's what we're going to do right now. I'm going to take a cue from Teach for India, where I just came from a conference where in this moment we're just going to have 2 minutes of quiet. And I'm going to ask you to think back to everything you saw here. And I would like you just to think about those 3 questions. What here, in my experience, validates one of these challenges for us? What, in my experience, challenges one of these challenges? Like, I just don't think that's right, and here's why. And or, if I think about a concrete implication of one of these ideas in my work, what might it be? If I took one of these seriously, if I took orientation to vision, or I took the power, privilege, identity really seriously, I would do things differently like this. I just want you to sit and think about that for yourself. And when we come back, we're going to get mics and we're going to ask a half dozen people to share. And we're going to use that to start a conversation. So just 2 minutes to think, please. Can I ask someone in the back of the room to help just get mics to people quickly? I am not very good at keeping my mouth shut. I'm going to try to keep my mouth shut and just ask people, stand up, share any thought you've got, especially curious about validations, challenges, and implications. And I want to get at least a half dozen people to share something. So let's just open up the floor.
Hello? Does it work? Okay, I'll just speak.
No, because she needs to hear, so
okay,
speak loudly into that.
I was just saying to you, Stephen, I had this powerful reaction when I was listening to your conversation about changing mindset and how you have to, it has to be almost a disorienting experience to change someone's mindset, and then they have to reflect. And I was thinking, as someone who works in staff development, how do you take teachers who are stuck in one mindset or have a very powerful mindset and disrupt their thinking by showing them something really new to prod them to consider that there might be more than one way to do it?
Thank you. I'm not going to respond to each of these. I'm going to get a bunch of these and then I'll share some thoughts. But I'll jot some things down.
I think all of the ideas I've seen here are really good and important. The challenge I see is how do you scale them? How do you do them for hundreds of children, for a lot of subjects that you're teaching? How can you do it simultaneously for all the students that you're having? Thank you.
Please introduce yourself. I meant to say that.
Jenny Sendola from Institute of Mathematics and Informatics. I've been working with teachers for many years now. And the typical question I get is, okay, these ideas are wonderful for one day. What about Monday? They want immediate results, immediate evaluation in the traditional manner. And the future, no matter how, for them this is the future, no matter how interesting, attractive, inquiry-based learning, for example, is, at the moment when the inspectors evaluate their knowledge by the test kids are performing at, then they don't feel satisfied. They feel challenged. And they would tell me something like, okay, we are your audience, we are motivated, but then we are judged by the results of our kids on tests, and this is not fair.
Can I push someone? Someone here is thinking, maybe I could say this, but I'm not sure. Say it. There we go.
Не е въпрос, повече разсъждение. Ще говоря на български. Мисля си за това. Много са хубави всичките елементи, всички могат да се приложат по-малко във всеки клас и може би много. Зависи от мястото, където работиш и от подготовката. През цялото време нещо ме тревожи и аз вчера друго споделях с някои от моите колеги, които не са тук сега, които преподаваха вече в Заедно в час. Тревожи ме следното. Ние всъщност трябва да работим с деца, които имат затруднения и така нататък, за да можем във всякакви отношения, за да можем да повишим тяхното ниво. Но с тях работят хора, които са подбрани от същата такава, от каймака на каймака, да кажем, т.е. от най-високото ниво. Те са подбрани с много тежки изпити, всички те имат страхотно образование и така нататък. И те се подготвят, за да работят така, допълнително. Първо ги подбират, после ги подготвят още и още. Нали? Ги наблюдават. А как стават нещата с обикновения учител, с моя обикновен студент, който 4 години учи, след това трябва да си намери работа за учител и трябва да... Аз също му казвам, че трябва да прави тези неща. Но той няма подкрепата на Заедно в час, той отива се бори всичко сам. Той е в ролята на вашия ученик, когато учили в обикновено училище. Това ме тревожи през цялото време.
Казвам се Радка Атанасова и съм редови учител по български език. Всичко това, което чух в английската версия, ви казвам, че който иска да бъде магиосник, нищо не го спира. В системата съм от повече от 20 години и това не ме е направило нито по-слаба, нито по-малодушна, нито по-изостанала. Имам самочувствието, че всеки един миг е страхотно предизвикателство, обаче това предизвикателство е дълбоко в мисълта и в сърцето на човека, който е решил да бъде учител. За съжаление, в нашия модел на висше образование, много съжалявам, ако накърня нечии интереси, категорично казвам, когато завърших Софийски университет, избрах да правя дипломна работа по методика на обучението. Защото никой тогава не ме научи как да бъда учител. И когато виждам всички тези млади колеги, а между другото съм безкрайно впечатлена, че сред тях виждам своя бивша студентка, една от вашите настоящи преподавателки в Заедно в час. Виждам друго момиче, което идва от моето училище. Аз съм от професионална гимназия, която в България, според мнението на хора от предишните сесии, е проблемна зона. Категорично не е така. Работя с деца с страхотна мисъл в главата, архитектурни виждания, които са в пъти повече от моите. И ако аз искам да съм в час, заедно в час с тях, трябва да отделя време от свободното си време. И въпреки, че съм литератор, се боря с технологиите, за които в изказването на моя колега не чух, че в Америка са нужни. Но тук трябва да сме магьосници. За да ги мотивираме, трябва да направиш нещо, за да се доближиш до виртуалното поколение. Те държат по-често в ръка мишка, отколкото химикалка. И когато им докажеш, че и с това трябва да имат избирателност и да се борят за своето интелектуално напредване, нещата се получават. Що се отнася до това, което професорът говори, нямам нещо, с което не се съгласявам. Първо, естествено е, че аз самата трябва да имам самочувствие на знаеща и можеща. Защото когато ученик ти задава въпрос и ти казваш, че трябва да си направи справка или че по интуиция трябва да усети нещата не са добри. Учителят трябва да може да реагира във всеки един миг, но не само по конкретното учебно съдържание. Защото българският учител трябва да бъде в ролята и на родител. Понякога много по-сериозно ние сме родители, отколкото истинските родители. Вълшебна е информацията, че там някъде в Полша, там някъде в Естония, там някъде в Америка има общност. За каква общност говорим в България, след като виждаме родителите един път или два пъти в годината? На установените законови родителски срещи, на които не се появяват родителите на най-проблемните деца. Така че ако аз като учител не проявя старание да разбера какво се крие зад бариерата на едно агресивно дете, защо го прави, как го прави, какви са причините, ако аз не отделя, ако аз не проникна зад тази бариера, нито един директор не би могъл да ме мотивира. Но ако говорим за мотивиране, нито един колега пък не разбира защо полагам толкова много усилия. Аз намирам отговор. И отговорът е, че когато вляза в час, виждам 26 човека, които знаят, че аз съм номер 1. Виждам го в очите им, а това ме мотивира цяла нощ до 2-3 да мисля какво ще направя в часа, как ще го направя, да им дадеш знак, че си струва да продължат, струва си да се борят, дори когато трябва с глава да побият стена. А в мое лице вижда човек, който споделя, че нееднократно пробивам с глава стена, нееднократно обаче търпя своите негативи, защото и на годините, на които съм лъгана нееднократно. И то от хора, на които съм разчитала. И за да ми претърпева гласа, това е знак, че съм истинска. А децата харесват истинските хора. Бъдете истински и много се надявам всички млади колеги да останат там, където най-много имаме нужда от тях. Благодаря ви.
Здравейте и от мен. Начален учител от София. Това, което ми направи впечатление, докато изслушвах и колегите и преди това в сесията всичко, така ми даде целта. Всъщност аз имах целта, но сега вече съм сигурна, че тя е тази, която наистина ме кара да правя нещата, които ги правя. А целта е да моите ученици, моите деца да бъдат щастливи. Да станат щастливи хора, независимо с какво ще се занимават в живота. Дали ще бъдат адвокати, лекари, дали ще бъдат просто монтьори в някой сервис, да бъдат щастливи хора. Да знаят как да се реализират, да знаят какво искат от живота си и да знаят как да го постигат. Това, което се замислих е колко важно е, както за нас учителите, така и за учениците, пред които ние заставаме, да не се страхуваме от грешки. Да не се страхуваме от грешките, а да ги приемем като нещо, което е нормален процес, за да достигнем до успеха. Защото ако ние се страхуваме от грешките, ние никога няма да започнем да работим малко по-различно. Няма да искаме да направим класната стая като лаборатория. Няма да искаме да се променяме всеки ден, да променяме това, което правим с учениците, за да бъдат по-успешни. А не го ли правим ние? Ако ние не се изправяме пред тези предизвикателства, няма как да го искаме и от нашите ученици. И заради това, може би, трябва да ги научаваме да не се страхуват от грешките, а да ги научим как да печелят от тези грешки. И тук искам да дам за пример един мой колега в моето училище, който, когато някой ученик в класа направи грешка, е научил другите ученици да ръкопляскат. Това са моите мисли. Много благодаря.
Аз бих искала да споделя по отношение на дори това, което виждам в момента, като част от презентацията, всъщност е студентското лидерство. И ако слушам вас, това, което вие казвате, слушам и презентацията, и това, което всъщност ни обясни нашия презентиращ, то някъде по средата в мен започва да се създава една по-голяма картина. И си мисля, че ако говорим за общество и ценности, в един момент трябва наистина да се огледаме кои са хората, които движат процеси различни, свързани с нашето учене и нашето образование. И аз казах и вчера, че харесвам идеята за синхронизиране на формално учене и неформално учене, но там някъде и младежките неправителствени организации, които в момента развиваме образователни процеси, методологии, и твърди, смея да кажа, че аз съм дипломиран всъщност учител, но не работя в формалната система на образование, съм избрала неформалното учене. И мога да кажа, че там някъде за мен лично е пресечената точка на това разбиране за различните роли. Защото информацията вече е навсякъде, особено за хората родени след 80-та година ни водят милениуми и за това, че знаем, че всичко може да бъде достъпено като информация, но тук нататък начина, по който ние развиваме тази информация. Тоест, учителя не е единственият човек, който дава вече знанието, а всъщност учителя трябва да ни помогне как да обработваме това знание и да развие нашето любопитство към знанието. Така че аз лично смятам, а пък това е нещо, което ние правим в неправителствения сектор и мисля, че вече идва време, защото това е процес, разбира се, в който да си протегнем ръка формалните институции и неформалните такива, които сме в същата една и съща сфера и да започнем да работим много повече заедно.
Can I say something very short? Because you wanted to... искахте да ви кажем предизвикателства и да ви челенджим малко модела. И взимайки това, което Лили каза. На първия въпрос, мисля, че всеки обучител и учител ще съгласи с тези неща, които казахте. Те са много готини, ние ги виждаме в нашата работа. А пък на третия, мисля, че всеки един от нас трябва да има някакъв инструмент личен да се развива всеки ден. Моят инструмент е медитация. Ако го няма това, никакъв шанс да оцеля в клас. За чаленджа. Излязаха няколко много интересни изследвания, последните 2 години ги следя, супер смешно, от руски и от американски учени, че след 30 години образованието няма да изглежда по този начин, който изглежда в момента. И според мен това е един от големите предизвикателства към вашия модел. Вие развивате модел на това лидерство в една система, която е обречена да не съществува в този формат след определени години. Дали ще бъде по-рано в Америка или по-рано в България, аз не знам. Къде ще стане по-рано по света, но тази система в този формат няма да съществува и това е време да си го кажем, че това нещо ще се случи. Както компютрите са изместили, примерно хартиената поща, с нощ това си говорихме, има мейли, няма хартиена поща, така ще стане с образование. И това не е ли едно от най-големите предизвикателства? Време да сменим изцяло перспективата, защото много от нещата, за които вие говорите и сме предизвикани да ги случваме в клас, те не се случват заради организацията на учебното време. Аз честно не мога да преподавам в 40 часове, за мен беше огромна борба да си воювам блокове 90 минутни. Аз не мога да преподавам в 40 минутен час. Не може този звънец да ме бие след 40 минути всеки път и побърквам, а честно.
Thank you. All right, we are in it now, right? I am going to do my best to share a few thoughts that weave together reactions to a few of the challenges and conversations that just happened. I am going to share thoughts that I truly believe, but that I don't expect everyone in this room believes. But that's the conversation I think we need to have. I'm going to start with your challenge. I hear you say, the problem with all of this model is it's targeted to a system that won't exist soon. I actually disagree. I think if we take these ideas seriously, they force us to a different system entirely. And I think that has to be true. I agree, the system will not look like it does 30 years from now. I think if we use that as a reason for inaction, we're in trouble. I think we have to take control of how that's going to change, and I think these are the ways it needs to change. And let me share two ideas. Again, I don't expect everyone to agree with me, but I genuinely do have come to believe this. The first, I think we need to start with a hard truth. And that hard truth is, if we actually look at the history of education, and I'm talking about all of human history. I'm not talking about Bulgaria. I'm not talking about the United States. I'm talking about the history of education of humankind. What has its purpose been? The purpose of education has been to maintain the power of people in power. A 1,000 years of education, what has its purpose been? To maintain the power of people in power, to maintain divisions between people. So those of you that were here yesterday, I sort of used this graph to say, like, there are some students who are born with a low probability of options, and that's how they live their whole life, and other students who are born with a high probability, and that's how they live their life. And we want a system that changes the probability of choice in students' lives. That is a fundamentally different purpose than the history of education has served. Fundamentally different purpose. And in the DNA of the system that we have is maintaining the power of people in power. You may think that this sounds like a radical, crazy thing to say. Honestly, I don't care. It's what I see. It's what I see over and over and over. And if we are going to take seriously the idea that the purpose of education can be to actually change students' paths in life, to actually take students who are running into all of the systemic injustices that we have around them and put them in a place where they would be sitting in this room with us today, where a Roma student born today is going to be able to apply and get in to teach for Bulgaria, the system we have is not going to do it. No turning of the knobs of the system we have is going to do it. So what do we do about that? I think we follow the teachers in the classrooms that are innovating and challenging it with students right now. What are these ideas? I'm not suggesting this is the answer, but we have to start somewhere, and I think this is where we start. The second thought that I want to share in response to that, I think many people, including my own mother, looks at all of this stuff and says, Stephen, if we say every teacher has to do all of these things, it's just impossible. And that's sort of your point. Like, there's so many things that these few teachers are doing. Can we really say we're going to get thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people to do that? I don't think that's what this tells us. It could be, but honestly, I don't believe we will get millions of teachers to teach like Nurali or Gergana. I don't know that we can do that. But there's a different way to look at this study. Instead of listening to all this and thinking, this is what teachers are doing that are putting children on a different path, that's true, that was the question of the study. What if we look at all of this instead from the student's perspective? This is what a student needed to get on a different path. When we look at all of this in that way, all of the sudden, we don't make the assumption that the teacher has to do it all. What we can say is, this is what a student needs to get on a different path in life, so how are we going to share those responsibilities? Some of you were probably in here yesterday when you heard Ed, there's Ed in the back, describing his school in London, which is one of those schools that is aspiring to be transformational as a school. When I listen to Ed's talk, what I see because of this work is a team of people trying to give students all of this, redistributing the responsibilities of all of this. So it's not on a teacher's shoulder, it is on others' shoulders. And Ed is the first to tell you that they're not there yet. It's hard. We can't figure out all of the different things, and we're learning and learning. But Ed, you need to take a moment and realize you are changing students' lives. I met 2 of his students in India last week. They were able to fly to India and be student leaders for us, leading us in a conversation. And they were provocative. They were challenging. They were challenging the world around them. That is happening because what we're doing is paying attention. We're thinking about studies like this not as a telling us, all right, we need 1 million teachers who do this, but rather we need students to receive this. So how do we change the system to do that? I do believe it's got to be radical. And that brings me back to the point yesterday. How are we going to get that radical? Your analogy, sir, about like changing a system, if you move the ball a little bit from its center of balance, it rolls back. That's how I feel. Like, we are doing so many things to turn this knob a little bit here, and this knob a little bit here, and this knob a little bit here, because the system protects itself. Because we have interests in it. We have salaries that come from it. We have investments in it of 20 years of a career of learning to work in a certain system. And all of those things make us say, oh gosh, you want to do something really different? No, that's not how we've done it. Every time we run into it. So how are we going to change the system? People. People. What's going to happen is some of us who are teachers are going to pursue this, and we may or may not get all of these things done. All of our students may or may not get on a different path in life. Some of our students may get on a different path, and if you're like me, they fall off of it later. And you cry at home because Ray Reyes left school and I never saw him again. And we were making such progress, but the realities of his life took him away from the path that we were building. And that was the reality. But you know what? My tribute to Ray Reyes is that I am going to work to challenge the things that made that true in his life. And I am going to work to say, how could it be different? And the truth is, I don't know. I don't have those ideas, but I have faith that if we have enough of us in pursuit of this aim for students, we are going to build in ourselves the conviction, we're going to build in ourselves the knowledge of what's holding us back, and we're going to start getting crazy and try different things, and that's what we've got to be. So what do we do in the meantime? We have to give ourselves autonomy, we have to expect high outcomes, and autonomy with how to get there. I think that is invention. We have got to focus on purpose, autonomy, and mastery, and we have got to get creative. Many of our systems inhibit that. But in those places where that's happening, let me tell you a quick story that illustrates this, that is born in tragedy. I visited schools in New Orleans in 2001, 2002, 2003. They were some of the worst schools I have ever been in my life. I felt unsafe. Children felt unsafe. There was not learning happening. 2005, there was a great tragedy in the United States. Hurricane Katrina came to New Orleans and destroyed the school system. Destroyed it. It was gone. What happens? What do we do? We have all these kids, total tragedy. What happens? What they did in New Orleans is they said, here's what we're going to do. We have school buildings, So many teachers have left, so many principals have left, we're just totally destroyed. We are going to make a call to anyone in the United States who wants to come and start a school. And here's the deal. We are going to say that your school, in your school, children have to learn this much. And if they don't, we're going to shut your school down. But we're not going to tell you anything about how to get there. We're going to let you decide how to get there. I know 5 people personally who left their lives other places in the United States. 5 incredible leaders who said, all I have ever wanted was the autonomy to create a community and a school that gets there. I absolutely agree with those aims that they're aiming for, but I want control. I want to pick the people that I work with. If they're not doing a good job, I want to be able to fire them. I want to be able to pick the curriculum that's going to get there. I want to work with students and families to decide how we get there. I want autonomy and ownership because that is where I'm going to innovate. I have now been to 4 schools in New Orleans, not necessarily those same people, some of them have been shut down, some of them stayed, where I would like to send my own children. It's a revolution, dramatically different. Is that enough change to get where we need to be? Probably not. Does it have the seeds of ideas of what it's going to take? I think absolutely yes. We have got to do so many things, right? Your starting question about changing mindsets and how do we create disorienting experiences for people. I mean, I think there's so many things we have to change. We need to select teachers differently. We need to treat teaching as the ultimate disorienting experience. It is. We need to help teachers make meaning. How is your day-to-day changing your beliefs from yesterday? We don't do that very often. We also need to think of preparation very differently. And I can tell a few stories. Some of our partners in the Teach for All network are really pushing us on this. I told this story yesterday, but you know, at Teach for India, where the concept of personal transformation is at the heart of what they think of as teaching, what they say is teaching is an act of personal transformation. So they don't do like we do in the United States, where the new teachers come in and we hustle them into the room to learn to lesson plan. They take them into a slum and they drop them off and they say, we will see you in 6 hours after you have made a genuine connection with a child. That's all they tell them. And people go into a community where they've never been, where they're afraid, where their first thought is, look at all the things this community doesn't have. And you know what they come out thinking? That community has some true beauty. That community has some true assets. The sense of community in that community, I wish I had had in my community. I was invited into 4 different homes for tea from people I didn't even know. I came to understand how hard people are working. I came to understand that a lot of the power that I experience, I was born into. Teach for India says that is actually making us better teachers than hurrying up to learn the lesson plan. That brings me to your very good, difficult question. And yes, new teachers, what they ask of us, and I understand, because I did this too, is, don't talk to me about purpose. Don't talk to me about vision. Tell me what to do Monday, right? At Teach for America, we survey our teachers 3 times a year. If I took every word in the survey, if I crossed out everything except for concrete and tomorrow, there's not much left. It's just concrete and tomorrow. I don't have a good, clean answer to that. I will say that we do have to give our teachers help with the technical stuff. There is no doubt. There are skills. We cannot pretend like, let's just build people's motivation and they'll be fine. That's just not true. all of what I'm saying is a reaction to the fact that I think we way overbalance the technical and we way undervalue the motivation, and that there needs to be a much better mix of those two things, even when it's frustrating at first to our teachers. Because what I have seen is I can go into a classroom and I can fix the symptoms of the challenge in ways that undermine that teacher's leadership. And that's not okay. We cannot fail to teach a man to fish by giving them a fish, right? What we are doing is building people for the long haul who have to be constant learners. And so the question is, how are we building those technical skills? Are we doing it by saying, here, do this? Or are we doing it in that conversation saying, I'm seeing you're having these problems. Just give me a few minutes. Let's talk about the root cause of those problems. Half the teachers I visit 3 months into the year are saying, I'm having classroom management problems. I ask those teachers, how would we solve them? You know what they say? I need better rules and consequences. Maybe. That may be true. But if I have a conversation where we say, let's study this. Why are you having classroom management problems? You know what? More often, I find that the classroom rules and consequences are fine, and there's some other root cause. It might be that this teacher's lesson plan every time sort of slows down and there's sort of an empty space, and the kids just fill it with activity. Like, you can leave your rules and consequences all day long. What we need to work on is your planning. Those questions of why are the only way we're going to get there and build to the merger of the technical and the adaptive, of the skills and the mindsets. And right now, I would argue that our system does not ask why. It does not create space to ask why. What it does is it hears our teachers say, give me the concrete, and it wants to answer that with, here, we hand you something, go do this, and that does nothing to build the skills for when they're not there. Which brings me back to student leadership and all of this, and I promise I'm about done. It's just the same, right? Our best teachers are asking themselves, are my students going to be great after they leave my classroom? We have to ask ourselves with our teachers, are these teachers going to be great when we're not there? And I think that tells us we have got to build, we've got to think about purpose alongside autonomy, alongside mastery. We have to think about all of these same issues that we're thinking about with students, with our teachers. You all, I have no idea. What time is it? I'm 10. Okay, so we were actually after time. We're about at time. Okay, thank you. You all, I didn't get to some stuff. Here's what I'd like to offer as you walk out. Actually, let me do this. Can I get a volunteer to hold these at the back of the room? Can I just make a volunteer? Will you stand this? One of these versions is in Bulgarian, okay? One of these is in English. Can I ask you to hold the English one? And if you speak English, please take the English. I don't think there's enough of these, but we'll get them to anybody who wants them. If you're at Teach for Bulgaria, we will get you this another way. And this one, it's not stapled, so everyone has to get 2 pages, but they're collated there. If you want those, you can get them. Let me tell you what they are. What's on that sheet of paper is an experiment to say, what if we took teaching as leadership, which we shared at the beginning, remember? And we took these 8 ideas that we just described, and we scrubbed them over teaching as leadership. What if we change the model to try to take these more seriously? What would a new teaching as leadership look like? I'm sharing this as a draft experiment. Truly, it's a draft experiment. I've only shared it with a few people so far, and we're scribbling over it, and there's things people like or not like, but what it is an attempt to turn these big challenges into actionable work for teachers by asking these questions. Obvious questions. What are we aiming for? How are we knowing we're making progress? What do we see students doing and thinking and feeling when they're making progress to those aims? What do we see teachers doing, thinking, and feeling? And how do we grow to be those people that are doing those things. Those are the questions that this attempts to bring these things together. If you look at this and you have thoughts about how that could change, find my email, tell me. This is my job. Like, this is what we're doing, is we are trying to create a conversation that's pushing this to change how we define and think about teaching. Thank you very much. There's going to be one person with Bulgarian versions, one person with English versions if you want. If they run out, I promise we'll get them to you somehow. Thank you for your time here today.